The mist clung to Hollow Creek as Hayley's car crept through its silent streets. The once vivid memories of her childhood now felt like they belonged to someone else, hazy and incomplete. She hadn't been back since she left over a decade ago, not since Sophie died. Now, she was there to settle her late mother's estate, a duty she dreaded but couldn't avoid. The looming Victorian house at the end of Willow Lane was just as she remembered, dilapidated and brooding. The air felt heavier as she stepped inside, the scent of mildew and old wood wrapping around her like a shroud. Hayley dropped her suitcase in the entryway, her footsteps echoing in the emptiness. Dust motes swirled in the weak sunlight that filtered through the cracked curtains. She glanced at the photograph hanging on the wall, her and Sophie as children, arms wrapped around each other, grinning. Something tightened in her chest as she turned away. A faint creak echoed behind her. She froze, staring at the empty hallway. "It's just the house settling," she muttered, but the unease stayed with her long after the silence returned. The marketplace was quieter than Hayley remembered. Hollow Creek had always been sleepy, but now it felt abandoned, its streets lined with boarded-up shops. She wandered through the few open stalls, her mind clouded by nostalgia. That's when she saw her, a figure, just beyond the edge of the square, a girl with chestnut hair, wearing a floral dress Hayley knew too well. Hayley blinked. It couldn't be. Sophie had been gone 4 years. She moved toward the girl, her heart racing, but a crowd shifted between them, and when Hayley reached the spot, there was no one there. That night, Hayley sat in the parlor of her mother's house, nursing a glass of wine. The faint laughter of children seemed to drift in from outside. Though she knew the street was empty, she dismissed it as her imagination. But later, as she climbed the stairs to bed, she noticed something peculiar, a photograph of her and Sophie on the kitchen counter, one she hadn't seen in years. The edges were scorched. Hayley couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The photograph, the laughter, the fleeting figure in the marketplace, it all gnawed at her. She searched the house the next morning, opening drawers and rifling through boxes. Buried beneath a stack of papers, she found her childhood diary. Its pages were brittle, the ink faded. One entry caught her eye. "Sophie's been acting weird lately. She's scared of something, but won't tell me what." The words ended abruptly, the rest of the page torn out. A sudden chill brushed against Hayley's neck. She turned sharply, but the room was empty. The next few days were a blur of unsettling encounters. Hayley saw Sophie again, in fleeting glimpses, her reflection in a window, her silhouette in the forest. At night, she heard whispers, faint but insistent. "Do you remember?" Hayley's dreams grew darker, filled with images of drowning and Sophie's laughter turning to screams. Hayley decided she needed answers. She visited the town's archives, combing through newspapers and records. The report on Sophie's death was sparse, a tragic accident, drowned in Hollow Creek. But there were whispers of something more. Mrs. Halloway, an elderly neighbor, was the only one willing to speak. "You shouldn't dig too deep," Mrs. Halloway warned, her voice low and trembling. "Some memories are best left buried. Sophie's death, it wasn't what you think." That night, Hayley found a note in Sophie's handwriting tucked into her mother's desk. "Do you remember what you did?" The forest was dense and dark, its twisted branches clawing at the sky. Hayley hadn't been to the old playhouse in years, but something drew her there now. The small wooden structure was barely standing, its walls warped and rotting. Inside, she found drawings pinned to the walls, childish scribbles of two stick figures holding hands, a third figure looming over them in shadow. Sophie's voice came then, clear and accusing. "You left me." Hayley spun around, and there she was, Sophie, pale and drenched, her eyes dark pools of anger. "You don't understand," Hayley cried. "I didn't mean to." The memory hit her like a tidal wave. The night by the creek, Sophie sobbing, begging Hayley not to leave. Hayley had tried to protect her from the man who hurt her, but in her panic, things had gone terribly wrong. Sophie had slipped, her head striking a rock, her body limp as the water swallowed her. Hayley fell to her knees in the playhouse, tears streaming down her face. Sophie's ghost loomed over her, a mixture of rage and sorrow etched into her translucent features. "I'm sorry," Hayley whispered. "I was trying to save you." Sophie's figure began to fade, her voice a whisper on the wind. "Remember me." When Hayley opened her eyes, the playhouse was empty, and the drawings were gone. The days that followed felt like a blur. Hayley stayed in Hollow Creek, restoring her mother's house and tending to the playhouse in the forest. The town seemed quieter now, its shadows less menacing. But at night, Hayley would sometimes hear laughter, soft and childlike, echoing through the trees. One morning, as she prepared to leave the house, she noticed something new on the hallway mirror, a stick figure drawing of two girls holding hands. The laughter returned, louder now, and Hayley knew that Sophie was still with her. Perhaps she always would be.